At Thanksgiving, my son said, "You don't fit in here, Mom." Those words pierced me sharper than any blade. I stood up immediately, though my legs shook like an autumn leaf in a gust of wind. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is Eleanor. I'm 72, and for years, my days have felt like a relentless loop of dusty quiet and empty chairs. I live in a tiny apartment in Chicago's Lincoln Park neighborhood where the leaves crunch underfoot in the fall and the lake wind whistles past the windows like a melancholy song. Every morning, I slowly wade through my routine. I make my coffee with the familiar bittersweet aroma that reminds me of better times, then check my phone for missed calls or messages from family. Messages that are rarely there. The radiator in my living room clanks like an old friend trying to speak. My hands, veined and spotted with age, wrap around the same chipped mug I've used for 15 years. The silence in my apartment is so thick I can hear my own heartbeat echoing off the walls. Outside my window, young mothers push strollers down the sidewalk, their laughter floating up like something I once knew but can barely remember. I wear the same gray cardigan every day, not because I don't have others, but because it's the only thing that feels like armor anymore. It's soft and familiar, like a shield against the world that has grown so cold. My reflection in the bathroom mirror shows a woman I barely recognize. When did my shoulders curve inward like this? When did my smile become something I have to remember how to do? That Thanksgiving afternoon started like any other holiday in recent years. I had been cooking since dawn, my arthritic fingers working through the pain to create a feast that might, just might, bring my family back to me. I prepared everything with the same devotion I'd shown for decades. Stuffing with sage that filled the apartment with warmth. Green bean casserole made from my mother's recipe. Pumpkin pie with a flaky crust that took me 3 attempts to get right because my hands shake more than they used to. I set the table with my good china, the set I'd saved for special occasions that seemed to come less and less frequently. Each plate placed with hope. Each fork aligned with desperate precision. I even put out cloth napkins, the ones I'd embroidered years ago when my eyes were sharper and my dreams were bigger. The doorbell rang at 2:30. My heart jumped like a teenager's, ridiculous and hopeful. I smoothed my dress, the navy blue one I'd worn to every important occasion for the past 5 years because my daughter once said it looked nice on me. That was before the comments started. Before I became invisible in my own family. Michael walked in first. My son. 45 years old, successful, married to a woman who tolerates me at best. He gave me that quick, obligatory hug that feels more like checking off a box than showing affection. His wife Sarah followed, her smile plastic and her eyes already scanning the room like she was calculating how long she'd have to stay. Then came my daughter Jessica, 38, with her 2 teenagers who immediately disappeared into their phones. She kissed my cheek with lips that barely touched my skin and handed me a store-bought pie still in its plastic container. The same brand I used to buy when I was too tired to bake, when I was working double shifts to keep food on their table. Behind them stood my husband Frank. 80 years old and more ghost than man these days. He's been shrinking for years, not just in body but in spirit. He watches everything happen and says nothing. Sometimes I wonder if he's forgotten how to speak up, or if he just stopped caring enough to try. The conversation around the dinner table felt like performing in a play where everyone else knew the script except me. They talked about their jobs, their vacations, their plans. None of which included me. When I tried to share news about my book club, Sarah interrupted to ask Michael about his golf game. When I mentioned that my arthritis was acting up, Jessica changed the subject to her daughter's college applications. I felt like I was drowning in plain sight. The breaking point came when I suggested we go around the table and share what we were grateful for, like we used to do when they were children. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah rolled her eyes. Jessica checked her phone. The teenagers looked mortified. And then Michael, my firstborn, the child I carried for 9 months and loved for 45 years, looked at me with tired eyes and said those words that will haunt me forever, "You don't fit in here anymore, Mom." The room froze. The sound of silverware against plates stopped. Even the teenagers looked up from their screens. I felt my heart crack like ice on a warm day, sudden and complete. My hands trembled so violently I had to place them flat on the table to steady myself. I could smell everything in that moment with painful clarity. The sage and the stuffing mixing with the tension in the air. The sweet scent of pumpkin pie competing with the bitter taste of rejection. My mother's perfume seemed to whisper from the walls where her photograph hung, reminding me of unconditional love that I thought I had passed on to my children but apparently had not. The photos scattered around my apartment told a different story. Happy birthdays with genuine smiles. Christmas mornings with children diving into presents I'd worked extra shifts to afford. Family vacations to Wisconsin where we'd rent a cabin and spend days fishing and nights telling stories around a campfire. When did those golden moments turn to brass? Looking back now, I can see the slow erosion that led to that devastating moment. The sacrifices I made weren't just financial, though those were crushing enough. For 30 years, I worked 2 jobs to keep our family afloat. Early mornings at Miller's Diner on Michigan Avenue, serving coffee and eggs to strangers who sometimes treated me with more kindness than my own family would later show. Afternoons at a boutique in Lincoln Park, helping women find clothes that made them feel beautiful while I wore the same 3 outfits on rotation because there was no money left for me. Frank worked construction until his back gave out when he was 58. After that, I became the sole provider, the one carrying the weight of our household on shoulders that were already bowed from years of bending to other people's needs. I never complained. Love doesn't complain, I told myself. Love gives until there's nothing left to give. Michael was in college then, studying business at Northwestern. Every month, his tuition payments left our checking account looking like a graveyard of dreams. I'd pack bologna sandwiches for lunch while sending him money for dining halls. I'd walk to work in shoes with holes in the soles while buying him textbooks that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. "Mom, can you help me out this month?" became his favorite phrase. Never, "How are you?" or "Thanks for everything you do." Just the expectation that I would provide, that I would sacrifice, that I would somehow make money appear from the thin air of our modest life. Jessica was no different. Even after she graduated and got a decent job at a marketing firm, the requests kept coming. "Just until I get my feet under me, Mom." But years passed, and her feet never quite found solid ground when it came to her own responsibilities. The conversations became sharper over time, like paper cuts that sting more than they should. "You're so old-fashioned, Mom," Jessica would say when I suggested family dinners or movie nights. "You don't understand how busy we are." When I'd call to check in, Michael's voice would carry that impatient tone parents usually reserve for telemarketers. "What do you need, Mom? I'm kind of in the middle of something." As if wanting to hear his voice was an imposition. As if loving him was an inconvenience. Frank witnessed all of this from his chair by the living room window, watching the Cubs games and saying nothing. Sometimes I'd catch him looking at me with what might have been sympathy, but he never spoke up. Never defended me. Never said, "These are your children, Eleanor. They should treat you better." His silence became another weight I carried. The doubts crept in slowly, like water through a crack in the foundation. Was I just a bank to them? An ATM that dispensed money and emotional support without expecting anything in return? When Michael called, my heart would leap, thinking maybe this time he just wanted to talk. But it was always about money, or a problem he needed me to solve, or a favor that only I could provide. "You're their mother," I'd tell myself. "This is what mothers do." But late at night, lying in bed listening to Frank snore and the neighbor's television through the thin walls, I'd wonder if real love was supposed to feel so one-sided. I'd wonder if I had somehow failed them, if my love had been too much or not enough or the wrong kind entirely. After handing over yet another check to help Jessica with her rent, after watching Michael barely acknowledge my birthday with a text message sent 3 days late, after years of being treated like a service provider rather than a person, I whispered to myself the question that had been growing in my heart like a tumor: am I just their bank now? The neglect wasn't dramatic. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts, each one small enough to dismiss but together forming a wound that never quite healed. My 70th birthday came and went without a single phone call. I sat in my apartment with a store-bought cupcake, singing "Happy Birthday" to myself in a voice that cracked with more than age. I'd been battling pneumonia that winter, coughing so hard my ribs ached. My prescriptions ran out, but I couldn't afford the refills after sending Michael money for Christmas gifts for his children, my grandchildren who barely knew my name. I called to ask if someone could take me to the pharmacy, just a 15-minute drive, but everyone was busy. Jessica had a work deadline. Michael had a golf tournament. Frank's arthritis was acting up. So I took 3 buses in the Chicago snow, my lungs burning with each breath of cold air, to pick up medicine that might have waited another week if I'd been anyone else's mother. The final straw came on a Tuesday afternoon in March. I was sorting through old mail when I found an envelope that had been delivered to my door by mistake. It was addressed to Michael, but to my address, which was odd since he'd been living in his own house for 15 years. Inside was a bankruptcy notice dated from 3 years ago. My bankruptcy, from when Frank's medical bills had overwhelmed us and I'd lost our family home. The notice had been redirected to Michael's address, then to mine, as if he'd been monitoring my financial situation without my knowledge. I called him immediately, my hands shaking as I dialed. "Michael, I found this notice. Why was this being sent to your address?" The pause that followed told me everything I needed to know. "Mom, we didn't want to worry you with the details. We were handling it. Handling it? This is my life, my credit, my bankruptcy. How were you handling something I didn't even know you knew about? Another pause. Then the truth, delivered with the casual cruelty that had become his specialty. Look, Mom, we needed to make sure you weren't making any financial decisions that would affect us. You're not exactly the most responsible with money. The woman who had worked 2 jobs for 30 years to support his education. The woman who had lost her home paying for his father's cancer treatments. Not responsible with money. I hung up the phone and stared at the piece of paper that represented the collapse of everything I'd built. They hadn't been protecting me from the stress of financial ruin. They'd been protecting themselves from the embarrassment of having a mother who'd failed. That night, I swept the broken pieces of a coffee cup I'd thrown in a moment of rage I didn't know I was capable of. The shards glinted on my kitchen floor like tears made solid, each piece reflecting the fluorescent light above my sink. I cried without sound, the way you learn to cry when decades of disappointment have taught you that screams don't bring comfort. As I picked up each fragment of ceramic, I wondered if this was what my life looked like to them. Broken pieces they had to clean up, sharp edges they had to navigate carefully to avoid getting cut themselves. The hunger for their approval warred with my growing need for basic respect. I'd spent so many years saying yes to every request, every demand, every casual dismissal of my feelings that the word no felt foreign in my mouth. Could I even say it anymore? Did I remember how? I found myself packing away the photo albums that night, heavy books filled with memories that felt like evidence of a crime I'd committed against myself. In album after album, I saw my own face growing smaller, my smile becoming more forced, my children growing larger and more distant. There I was at Michael's wedding, beaming with pride while he looked through me in the pictures. There was Jessica's college graduation, my face bright with joy while hers showed only impatience to get the ceremony over with. Page after page of love unreturned, effort unappreciated, sacrifice taken for granted. I placed the albums on the highest shelf of my bedroom closet, too heavy to carry and too painful to keep looking at. In the bathroom mirror, I stared deep into my own reflection. Brown eyes that had once sparkled with hope now looked back at me with the exhaustion of someone who'd run a marathon and found the finish line kept moving farther away. My gray hair framed a face mapped with lines of worry, laugh lines that had forgotten how to form, crow's feet that had witnessed too much heartache. Who was this woman? When had I become a ghost in my own life? The confrontation was inevitable, though I didn't plan it. It happened one evening in April when Michael called asking for money to help with his daughter's private school tuition. $2,000, due by the end of the week. Michael, I can't, I said, the words feeling strange and powerful in my mouth. What do you mean you can't? You helped Jessica last month. I mean I can't keep doing this. I'm not your personal loan service. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a coldness that chilled me to the bone. Fine, Mom. But don't expect us to keep including you in family events if you're going to be difficult. Difficult. For setting a boundary after 7 decades of having none. That weekend, Jessica called for what I thought might be an apology. Instead, she launched into emotional manipulation with the skill of a professional. Mom, I don't understand why you're being so harsh all of a sudden. We've always been a close family. We help each other. That's what love is. Help each other. As if the helping hadn't been flowing in only one direction for years. Frank listened to these conversations from his chair, his watery blue eyes tracking my movements around the apartment but never offering support. After I hung up with Jessica, I turned to him, desperate for someone to acknowledge what was happening. Frank, do you think I'm being unreasonable? He looked at me for a long moment, then turned back to his baseball game. They're your children, Eleanor. You figure it out. Even my husband had abandoned me to navigate this pain alone. But amidst the family's emotional gymnastics, a light appeared in the form of my granddaughter Mia. 16 years old, Jessica's daughter, she had her grandmother's eyes and a heart that hadn't yet learned to take love for granted. She started visiting on Saturday afternoons, drawn by some instinct that told her I needed rescuing as much as she needed a safe place to land in her turbulent teenage world. Mia would sit on my small balcony overlooking the Chicago skyline, her legs folded under her like a young bird settling into a nest. She'd tell me about school, about her friends, about her dreams of becoming a veterinarian. And she'd listen when I talked about my own young dreams, the ones I'd set aside to nurture everyone else's. Grandma, she said one afternoon, her teenage wisdom cutting through decades of my confusion, you know they're not supposed to treat you like that, right? Her small hand in mine felt like an anchor in a storm I hadn't realized I was drowning in. My first taste of freedom came quietly, without fanfare or dramatic declarations. Michael called on a Thursday evening in May, his voice carrying that familiar expectation. Mom, Sarah's car broke down and we need $1,500 for repairs. Can you transfer it tonight? For 45 years, I would have said yes immediately. I would have checked my bank balance, calculated what bills I could postpone, and found a way to make his problem disappear. Instead, I heard myself say, "No, Michael. I can't do that anymore." The silence that followed felt like the world holding its breath. What do you mean you can't? It's not that much money. I mean I won't. There's a difference. Mom, you're being ridiculous. It's your son asking for help. And I'm your mother asking for respect. I hung up before he could respond, my hands shaking with adrenaline and something I hadn't felt in years, pride. That evening, I sat by my window watching the lights twinkle across the Chicago skyline. The city pulsed with life while my apartment settled into a quiet I'd forgotten could feel peaceful instead of lonely. For the first time in decades, I went to bed without worry gnawing at my stomach, without calculating how to stretch money I didn't have to solve problems that weren't mine. I slept deeply that night, unburdened by the weight of other people's expectations. The next morning felt different. I made my coffee and didn't check my phone for angry messages. I ate breakfast without my stomach churning with anxiety. I even hummed while I watered the few plants scattered around my living room, amazed that I could remember how melody was supposed to work. That afternoon, I called a lawyer. Catherine Morrison, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a firm handshake, listened to my story without judgment. She helped me understand my rights, my options, and most importantly, the value of what I'd built over a lifetime of work. "Mrs. Patterson," she said, using my formal name in a way that made me feel substantial again, "you have more power than you realize. Your generosity has been taken advantage of, but that doesn't mean you're powerless." I also started seeing a therapist. Dr. Rachel Chen, a soft-spoken woman who specialized in family dynamics and elder care, gave me words for feelings I'd carried but never named. "What you're describing," she said during our third session, "is financial and emotional abuse. The fact that it comes from family doesn't make it less real." Abuse. The word hung in the air between us like something tangible. I'd never thought of myself as abused, but hearing it spoken aloud made something click into place inside my chest. Yes. That's what this was. The changes were small at first. I stopped answering my phone immediately when my children called. I let their messages pile up while I decided whether I had the emotional energy to engage. I started going to matinee movies on weekday afternoons, something I'd never done because it felt indulgent. I bought myself flowers for the first time in my adult life. Daffodils from the grocery store, nothing fancy, but they sat on my kitchen table like tiny suns, reminding me that beautiful things could exist just for me. Mia noticed the changes immediately. "You look different, Grandma," she said during one of our Saturday visits. "Lighter, maybe?" "Lighter." Yes, that was exactly right. The final confrontation came in October, 8 months after I'd started saying no and meaning it. Jessica called to announce a family dinner at Romano's, a mid-priced Italian restaurant in Lincoln Park where we'd celebrated birthdays when the children were young. "We need to talk, Mom," she said, her voice carrying the authority she'd learned in her marketing job. "This whole situation has gotten out of hand." I agreed to meet them, not because I was ready to cave, but because I was finally ready to speak my truth. The restaurant was crowded on a Saturday evening, filled with families who seemed to genuinely enjoy each other's company. I arrived first, wearing a dress I'd bought the week before, deep burgundy with a pattern of small flowers. It was the first piece of clothing I'd purchased for myself in 3 years. Michael and Sarah arrived exactly on time, his face stern and her mouth set in a disapproving line. Jessica came 5 minutes later with Frank trailing behind, looking as uncomfortable as I'd ever seen him. Even Mia was there, though she sat next to me instead of with her mother. The conversation started with complaints disguised as concern. "Mom, you're not acting like yourself," Jessica began. "This whole money thing is causing problems for everyone." "What problems?" I asked, my voice steady. "Well, Michael might have to pull Emma out of private school. I can't afford the repairs on my house that I was counting on your help with. It's like you don't care about our needs anymore." "Their needs. Not my needs. Never my needs." Sarah chimed in with her practiced sweetness. "We're worried about you, Eleanor. This isn't how family treats family." I could have let them steamroll me. I could have apologized and opened my checkbook and gone back to the familiar dance of giving everything and getting nothing. Instead, I reached into my purse and pulled out the family portrait we'd taken 5 years ago at Sears, all of us smiling for the camera in our carefully coordinated outfits. With everyone watching, I tore it in half. The paper made a satisfying ripping sound that seemed to echo through the restaurant. I tore it again, and again, until the pieces fell like confetti onto the checkered tablecloth. "Enough," I said, my voice calm but carrying a steel I'd never heard in it before. "I will no longer buy your love. I will no longer pretend that being family gives you the right to treat me like a transaction. Sarah gasped audibly. Michael's face flushed red with anger or embarrassment or both. Jessica stared at me like I'd grown a second head. You want to know what's not how family treats family? I continued, my words flowing like water through a broken dam. Family doesn't ignore each other's birthdays. Family doesn't hang up when someone is sick and needs help. Family doesn't monitor each other's bankruptcy filings like it's some kind of business investment. Frank's eyes widened at that last part. Even he hadn't known about Michael's surveillance of my finances. Family doesn't make their mother feel like a stranger at her own dinner table. Family doesn't tell someone they don't fit in their own life. I stood up, my legs steadier than they'd been in months. So here's what's going to happen. You can learn to treat me with respect, or you can lose me. But I will never again apologize for having boundaries. I will never again feel guilty for saying no. And I will never again pretend that your taking is the same thing as my giving. The restaurant felt silent around our table, though I'm sure the conversations continued. All I could hear was my own heartbeat, strong and sure in my chest. Respect me, I said, looking each of them in the eye, or lose me. Then I walked out, leaving them with the check and the scattered pieces of our broken family portrait. Mia caught up with me on the sidewalk outside. Grandma, wait. I turned to see her running toward me, her young face bright with something that looked like admiration. That was amazing, she said, slightly out of breath. I've never seen you like that before. I've never been like that before. She hugged me tight on that busy Chicago street, and for the first time in years, I felt like someone was proud of me. The weeks that followed were a mixture of relief and anxiety. My phone rang less frequently, which was both liberating and lonely. Michael sent a few angry text messages that I deleted without reading completely. Jessica tried calling twice, but when I didn't answer, she stopped trying. Frank became even more withdrawn, if that was possible. He watched me like I was a stranger who'd wandered into his house and started rearranging the furniture. Maybe that wasn't far from the truth. But Mia's visits continued, and they became the highlight of my week. She'd arrive on Saturday afternoons with homework or a book she wanted to share, and we'd sit on my balcony watching the city move below us. She told me about her college applications, her part-time job at a veterinary clinic, her first serious boyfriend who seemed to genuinely care about her happiness. You taught me something important that night at the restaurant, she told me one crisp November afternoon. You taught me that love shouldn't hurt this much. I was teaching her, this bright young woman who had her whole life ahead of her. After decades of feeling useless, I was actually teaching someone something valuable. One evening in late November, I was cleaning out my desk drawers when I discovered something that changed everything. Tucked behind a stack of old bills was my phone, and somehow I'd accidentally opened a text thread from several months earlier. It was between Jessica and Sarah, and my name was at the top of their conversation. The messages made my blood run cold. Jessica, Mom's getting weirder. Called 3 times this week. Sarah, Michael's so over it. She needs hobbies or something. Jessica, LOL right? Like maybe volunteer at a nursing home so she can complain with people her own age. Sarah, harsh but fair. She's becoming such a burden. Jessica, at least she's useful for emergencies. Free babysitting and emergency cash. Sarah, for now. Eventually we'll have to deal with her living situation. Michael's already looking into facilities. The conversation continued for several more exchanges, each message revealing layer after layer of callousness I never could have imagined from my own children. They were planning my life without me, discussing me like I was a problem to be managed rather than a person to be loved. The betrayal cut deeper than anything they'd ever said to my face. These were my children, talking about me like I was a burden they were stuck carrying. Making jokes about my loneliness. Planning to put me away somewhere I could be someone else's responsibility. But this time, my response was completely different. I didn't cry. I didn't call them demanding explanations. I didn't even feel angry. I felt free. I screenshotted the conversation and saved it to my photos, not because I planned to use it as ammunition, but because I wanted proof that my instincts had been correct. I wasn't imagining the coldness. I wasn't being overly sensitive. I was being treated exactly as badly as I thought I was. Then I deleted their numbers from my phone. If they wanted to reach me, they'd have to work for it. And if they didn't want to work for it, well, that would tell me everything I needed to know. This moment crystallized something that had been building inside me for months. I was no longer Eleanor the doormat, Eleanor the ATM, Eleanor the inconvenient mother who didn't fit into her children's lives. I was Eleanor Patterson, a 72-year-old woman who deserved better and was finally ready to demand it. I was reclaiming my space in this world. The rebirth didn't happen overnight, but it began that very evening. I called Mia and asked if she'd like to learn how to make my mother's pumpkin pie recipe, the one I'd been perfecting for 50 years. She arrived the next afternoon with flour in her hair from her first attempt and excitement in her eyes. We spent 3 hours in my tiny kitchen, measuring and mixing and talking about everything except the family drama that had brought us closer together. She told me about her dream of opening a veterinary clinic that specialized in rescue animals. I told her about my own dreams from decades ago, dreams of travel and art and adventure that I'd never pursued because there was always someone else's dream that seemed more important. "Why can't you still do those things, Grandma?" she asked, her 16-year-old optimism challenging my 72-year-old resignation. "I suppose I could," I said, surprised by how possible it suddenly sounded. That weekend, I joined the book club at the Harold Washington Library in downtown Chicago. 12 women and 3 men, most of them somewhere between 50 and 80, gathering every Saturday morning to discuss novels and share coffee and occasionally argue about plot points with the passion of people who still believed stories mattered. Margaret, a retired teacher in her 60s, invited me to lunch after my third meeting. "You have interesting insights," she said. "And you seem like someone who's been through some changes recently." I found myself telling her my story, not all of it, but enough for her to understand why I seemed both fragile and fierce at the same time. "Good for you," she said when I finished. "I went through something similar with my own son about 10 years ago. It's amazing how much punishment we'll accept in the name of love." 2 weeks later, I signed up for art classes at the Chicago Cultural Center. I hadn't held a pencil for drawing since I was in my 20s, but muscle memory is a strange and wonderful thing. Within an hour, I was sketching the view from the classroom window, surprised by how naturally my hand moved across the paper. The instructor, a woman in her 40s with paint-stained fingers and an encouraging smile, stopped by my easel. "You have a good eye," she said. "Have you drawn before?" "A long time ago," I said. "I used to love it." "Well, it shows. You should consider the watercolor class we're starting next month." I should consider it. Someone thought I should consider pursuing something that brought me joy simply because it brought me joy. The concept felt revolutionary. My apartment began to change along with me. I bought plants, real ones that required care and attention but gave back beauty and life. I replaced my threadbare curtains with ones in a soft yellow that let more light into my living room. I finally threw away Frank's collection of sports magazines dating back to 1987, creating space on the coffee table for books and fresh flowers. The biggest change was my wardrobe. I'd been wearing the same shapeless cardigans and comfortable but unflattering pants for years, clothes chosen for their practicality rather than how they made me feel. But one afternoon, walking past a boutique in Lincoln Park, I caught sight of a red jacket in the window. It was bright and confident and completely unlike anything I'd worn in decades. I tried it on just for fun, not intending to buy it. But when I looked in the dressing room mirror, I saw someone I'd forgotten existed. The red brought color to my cheeks and light to my eyes. It looked like hope woven into wool. I bought it, along with a pair of dark jeans that actually fit properly and a silk scarf that felt luxurious against my neck. When I wore the red jacket to book club the following Saturday, Margaret whistled appreciatively. "Look at you," she said. "That color is perfect for you." Perfect for me. When was the last time someone had said something was perfect for me? Mia noticed the changes immediately when she came for our regular Saturday visit. "Grandma, you look like yourself again," she said, though I wasn't entirely sure what she meant. "What do you mean?" "I don't know exactly. But you look like the person you are inside instead of like someone who's hiding." Hiding? Yes, I had been hiding, hadn't I? Hiding behind old clothes and old patterns and old fears that I wasn't worth the effort it took to care for myself. Our Saturday afternoons became adventures. We'd take the L into downtown Chicago, exploring museums and cafes and bookstores. Mia would point out street art and interesting architecture while I'd share stories about the city as I'd known it when I was her age. "You're teaching me so much, Grandma," she said one afternoon as we sat in Millennium Park watching tourists take photos with the Cloud Gate sculpture. "What am I teaching you?" "That it's never too late to start over. That you can love people without letting them hurt you. That being older doesn't mean being invisible." Her words made me cry, but they were good tears, the kind that comes from being seen and understood and valued for who you actually are rather than what you can provide. The holidays came and went without the usual stress and obligation. Christmas morning was quiet but not lonely. Mia came over with homemade cookies and a small wrapped package that contained a framed photo of the two of us from our last museum visit. We were both smiling genuine smiles, and I looked happier than I had in any family photo from the past decade. I made Christmas dinner for two, and we ate by candlelight while soft jazz played on the radio. It was peaceful in a way I'd never experienced during the elaborate holiday productions I'd orchestrated for years, trying to create perfect family moments for people who treated them like obligations to be endured. Michael called that evening, his first phone contact in over 2 months. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won over caution. "Merry Christmas, Mom," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Merry Christmas, Michael." A pause. Then, "How are you doing?" "I'm doing very well, actually. How are you?" Another pause, longer this time. "We missed you at dinner today." I waited for him to continue, but he didn't. Finally, I said, "That was a choice you made." "Mom, I think maybe we should talk." "We are talking. I mean really talk. About what happened at the restaurant. About this whole situation. I'm open to talking, Michael. But only if you're ready to listen." He sighed, and in that sigh, I heard something I hadn't heard from him in years: uncertainty. For the first time in our relationship, he wasn't sure he held all the power. "Can I come over this week? Maybe we can figure this out." "You can come over. But Michael, you need to understand something. I'm not the same person who tore up that photograph. I'm someone else now. Someone who knows her worth." "I know, Mom. Maybe that's not necessarily a bad thing." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't acknowledgement of the hurt he'd caused. But it was a crack in the wall he'd built between us, and for now, that felt like enough. We made plans to meet the following Saturday. After I hung up, I wondered if I was making a mistake by agreeing to see him. Dr. Chen had warned me about the cycle of abuse, how abusers often come back with promises and temporary changes that don't last. But I was different now. I had boundaries that felt real and solid. I had people in my life who valued me for who I was rather than what I could give them. If Michael was ready to meet me as an equal, I was willing to try. If he wasn't, I was strong enough to walk away. Spring arrived early in Chicago that year, and with it came a restlessness I hadn't felt in decades. Mia was preparing for her senior year of high school and starting to think seriously about colleges. She'd been accepted to several veterinary programs, including one in Colorado that she was particularly excited about. "I'm going to miss you terribly," I told her one afternoon as we walked along the lakefront path, watching joggers and cyclists and dog walkers enjoy the warming weather. "You could visit," she said. "Colorado's supposed to be beautiful. You could take one of those art classes you've been talking about at the community college there. Visit Colorado. Travel somewhere just because I wanted to see it." The idea felt both impossible and inevitable, like something I'd been moving toward without realizing it. "Maybe I could," I said, and meant it. That weekend, I did something I never would have imagined a year earlier. I researched senior travel groups and found one that specialized in art and culture trips for people over 55. They had a watercolor painting tour of New Mexico scheduled for the fall, small groups, reasonably priced, designed for beginners as well as experienced artists. I called and requested a brochure, then sat staring at it for an hour. The photographs showed older adults with easels set up in front of stunning desert landscapes, their faces focused and content as they captured beauty on paper. Could that be me? Could I be someone who traveled for pleasure, who pursued art for its own sake, who lived for herself instead of in service to other people's needs? I filled out the application that same day and mailed it before I could change my mind. Michael's visit went better than I'd expected, though that bar was admittedly quite low. He arrived on time, looking uncomfortable in his good jeans and button-down shirt, like he was dressed for a job interview rather than visiting his mother. We sat in my living room, which looked different enough from his last visit that he commented on it immediately. "The place looks nice, Mom. Brighter." "Thank you. I've been making some changes." He nodded and looked around at my new plants, the yellow curtains, the art supplies I'd left out on the dining room table after my morning sketching session. "So you're drawing again?" "I am. I'd forgotten how much I enjoyed it." Another nod, then a longer silence. Finally, he said, "I owe you an apology." I waited. "The thing I said at Thanksgiving, about you not fitting in. That was cruel and untrue. You're my mother. You fit in everywhere I am." It was a start, though it didn't address the years of taking me for granted, the financial manipulation, the casual dismissal of my needs and feelings. But it was something. "Thank you for saying that, Michael. I also need you to know that I didn't handle the bankruptcy thing well. We were trying to protect you, but I can see how it felt like we were going behind your back." "You were going behind my back." He flinched slightly. "Yeah, we were. And that was wrong." Another silence, then he said, "Sarah and I have been talking. About how we've been treating you. About how we've been taking advantage." "And what did you conclude?" "That we need to do better. That we've been selfish. That you deserved better from us." I studied his face, looking for signs of sincerity or manipulation. What I saw was a middle-aged man who looked tired and perhaps a little ashamed. Michael, I appreciate you saying these things. But I need you to understand that I can't go back to the way things were. I won't be anyone's emergency fund anymore. I won't accept being treated like an inconvenience. I won't pretend not to have feelings so that yours can take up all the space. I know. I understand that now. Do you? Because it's one thing to say it sitting in my living room on a Saturday afternoon. It's another thing to live it when you need something from me and I say no. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You're right. I guess I'll have to prove it to you over time." Yes. You will. It wasn't reconciliation, exactly, but it was the beginning of something that might eventually become a healthier relationship. I wasn't ready to trust him completely, but I was willing to see if his actions would match his words. Jessica remained silent and distant, which honestly came as a relief. Of all my children, she had been the most manipulative, the most skilled at making me feel guilty for having boundaries. Her absence felt like freedom rather than loss. Frank passed away quietly in his sleep on a Tuesday morning in June. He'd been declining for months, his body finally giving up the fight against time and illness and disappointment. I found him in his chair by the living room window, the Cubs game from the night before still playing softly on the television. His death was sad but not tragic, the end of a story that had been winding down for years. At his funeral, a small service attended by a few neighbors and old friends, Michael and Jessica sat together in the front row while I sat with Mia and Margaret from my book club. After the service, Jessica approached me for the first time in months. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mom," she said, her voice formal and careful. "Thank you. I know you and Dad had your problems toward the end, but he loved you." I wasn't sure that was true, but I nodded anyway. Frank had loved me once, in his way. Maybe that was enough. "We should talk," Jessica continued. "About everything. About Dad's will and the apartment and where you want to live now." There it was. The assumption that I would need taking care of, that decisions would be made for me rather than by me. Even in grief, even at her father's funeral, she was managing me like a problem to be solved. "I'm fine where I am, Jessica. The apartment is mine. I can take care of myself." "But Mom, you're 72. Living alone might not be safe much longer." "I'm 72, not 92. And I'm healthier and happier now than I've been in years." She looked skeptical, but Mia appeared at my elbow before the conversation could continue. "Grandma, are you ready to go?" I was. Ready to leave the funeral, ready to leave the assumption that I was helpless, ready to leave the old patterns that had kept me small for so long. That evening, Mia helped me go through Frank's belongings. Most of his clothes went to charity. His books and papers went into recycling. His chair by the window, the one that had housed his shrinking presence for the last years of his life, went to a neighbor whose husband needed furniture for his own retirement. With Frank's chair gone, the living room felt bigger, brighter. I moved my easel to that spot by the window and set up a small table for my art supplies. The view of the street that Frank had watched for hours now became inspiration for my sketching. Life continued to expand rather than contract. My New Mexico art trip was approved, and I found myself planning my first real vacation in 30 years. I bought luggage, something I'd never owned because we'd never been able to afford family vacations when the children were young. The book club became a deeper source of friendship. Margaret and I started meeting for coffee between our Saturday meetings, and she introduced me to other women who'd navigated similar family challenges. I learned that I wasn't alone in my experience, that elder abuse was more common than I'd realized, and that recovery was possible at any age. Dr. Chen helped me understand that healing wasn't linear, that I would have bad days along with the good ones, but that overall I was moving in the right direction. She taught me techniques for managing guilt and anxiety, for recognizing manipulation tactics, for maintaining boundaries even when it felt uncomfortable. "You've made remarkable progress," she told me during one of our sessions. "A year ago, you came in here feeling invisible and worthless. Look at you now." I did look at myself, in the mirror she kept on her office wall. The woman looking back at me wore a red jacket and silver earrings. Her hair was styled in a way that framed her face rather than hiding it. Her eyes looked alert and engaged rather than defeated. "I look different," I agreed. "You are different. You've reclaimed yourself." Reclaimed myself. Yes, that was exactly what I'd done. Michael's attempts to rebuild our relationship were inconsistent but genuine enough that I remained cautiously optimistic. He called every couple of weeks, not asking for anything, just checking in. He didn't always understand my new boundaries, but he was trying to respect them. When he invited me to Emma's graduation party, I was surprised by how much I wanted to go. My granddaughter was graduating from high school, moving on to college in the fall. I wanted to celebrate that milestone with her, even if it meant navigating the complicated dynamics of family gatherings. The party was held in Michael and Sarah's backyard, a modest space decorated with balloons and streamers in Emma's school colors. I arrived wearing my red jacket and carrying a gift I'd chosen myself rather than having someone else pick it out, a beautiful art set for the young woman who'd inherited her grandmother's creative spirit. Emma's face lit up when she saw me. "Grandma Eleanor. You look amazing." We hugged, and I felt the genuine affection I'd been missing from my interactions with her parents. Emma was 18 now, old enough to see family dynamics more clearly, and she seemed to appreciate my presence in a way her parents had forgotten how to do. The party went well. I chatted with neighbors and other relatives, people who seemed genuinely happy to see me. Sarah was cordial but distant, which was fine with me. Michael made an effort to include me in conversations and thank me for coming. As I was leaving, Emma walked me to my car. "Grandma, I'm really glad you came tonight." "I'm glad I came too, sweetheart. I know things have been complicated with Mom and Dad and Aunt Jessica. But I want you to know that I see how they've treated you, and it's not okay." Her maturity surprised me. "Thank you for saying that, Emma. You've been different this past year. Stronger, I guess. I like seeing you stand up for yourself." "I like it too." She hugged me again, and I drove home feeling like the evening had been a success. I'd maintained my boundaries while still participating in my granddaughter's important moment. I'd shown my family that I could be present without being a pushover. Progress, I realized, looked different than I'd expected. It wasn't about dramatic confrontations or perfect resolutions. It was about small choices made consistently over time. It was about showing up for myself the way I'd always shown up for other people. The summer passed in a blur of art classes, book club meetings, and long walks along the lakefront with Mia. We talked about her college plans, her dreams for the future, her boyfriend who was turning out to be a genuinely good young man who respected her intelligence and ambition. "You know what I love about you, Grandma," she said one afternoon as we shared ice cream on Navy Pier, watching the boats drift by on Lake Michigan. "What's that?" "You're becoming more yourself every day. Like you're finally growing into who you were always supposed to be." Growing into who I was always supposed to be. The idea that my best self might still be emerging at 72 felt both miraculous and obvious. Why should personal growth have an expiration date? Why should the capacity for change and joy in new experiences diminish with age? My New Mexico trip loomed closer, and with it came a mixture of excitement and nervousness I hadn't felt since I was young. I'd never traveled alone before, never spent money on something purely for my own pleasure, never prioritized my desires over my family's needs. The night before I left, I packed my new suitcase with art supplies and comfortable clothes and a journal I'd bought specifically for documenting the adventure. Mia came over to help and to say goodbye. "I'm so proud of you, Grandma," she said as we folded my clothes into neat stacks. "You're doing something brave." Brave. I'd never thought of myself as brave, but maybe she was right. Maybe leaving an abusive situation was brave. Maybe setting boundaries was brave. Maybe pursuing joy at any age was the bravest thing of all. New Mexico exceeded every expectation I'd had, which admittedly weren't very high since I'd spent so many years expecting disappointment. The landscape was breathtaking, all red rock and endless sky and light that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The other people in the group were artists and teachers and retirees like me, all of us drawn together by a love of beauty and a willingness to try something new. I painted terrible watercolors and magnificent ones, sometimes on the same day. I learned techniques I'd never heard of and rediscovered muscles in my hand I'd forgotten I had. I ate meals I hadn't cooked and slept in a bed I didn't have to make and had conversations about art and literature and travel with people who knew nothing about my family drama and cared only about the person I was in the present moment. One evening, as we sat around a campfire under a sky filled with more stars than I'd ever seen over Chicago, a woman named Ruth asked me what had brought me on this trip. "I'm learning to live for myself," I said, surprised by the simplicity and truth of the answer. "Good for you," she said. "It's never too late to start. Never too late to start." The words became a mantra I carried back to Chicago, along with rolled-up paintings and a heart that felt larger somehow, expanded by beauty and possibility. Mia met me at O'Hare Airport, practically bouncing with excitement to hear about my adventures. She flipped through my sketchbook in the car, exclaiming over landscapes she'd never seen and techniques I'd attempted for the first time. "You're glowing, Grandma," she said as we pulled into the parking lot of my apartment building. "Like you're lit up from inside." Lit up from inside. Yes, that captured exactly how I felt. My apartment welcomed me back like an old friend. The plants had survived, Margaret had watered them while I was gone, the yellow curtains still let in warm light, and my easel by the window looked ready for new projects inspired by my travels. But something had shifted during my week away. The space that had once felt like a refuge now felt like a launching pad. I could stay here, and I would be content. Or I could use it as a base for further adventures. The choice was mine, and that freedom felt intoxicating. Michael called the day after I returned, asking how the trip had gone. For the first time in our relationship, he seemed genuinely interested in my answer rather than just going through the motions of polite conversation. It was transformative, I told him, and meant it. I'm glad, Mom. You sound different. Happy. I am happy. It's taken me time to remember what that feels like, but I am genuinely happy. There was a pause, then he said something that surprised me. I think I'm starting to understand what I almost lost when I said those things at Thanksgiving. I'm grateful you didn't give up on us completely. I didn't give up on us, Michael. I gave up on being treated poorly. There's a difference. I know. And I'm working on being someone worthy of the mother you've always been. It wasn't perfect. We still had work to do, conversations to have, trust to rebuild. But it was honest, and that felt like solid ground on which to build something new. Jessica remained absent from my life, and I'd made complete peace with that. Sometimes love means letting people make their own choices, even when those choices exclude you. Her silence was her loss more than mine. Fall arrived with its familiar crispness, and with it came a decision I'd been avoiding for months. Mia was leaving for college in Colorado in January, beginning her journey toward becoming the veterinarian she dreamed of being since childhood. The city would feel different without our Saturday afternoon adventures, quieter without her laughter echoing through my apartment. But instead of mourning her departure, I found myself planning my own next adventure. The senior travel group had a photography tour of Ireland scheduled for spring, and Italy in the summer, and Morocco in the fall. Destinations I'd only dreamed of seeing, experiences I'd convinced myself were for other people, not for mothers and wives and women who'd spent their lives in service to others. Why not me? Why not now? I signed up for the Ireland trip that very afternoon, and then called Mia to tell her the news. Grandma, that's amazing, she squealed into the phone. You're going to love it. And I can't wait to see the paintings you'll make there. Paintings I would make in Ireland. The idea still felt surreal, but also inevitable. This was who I was becoming, someone who traveled and painted and made choices based on curiosity rather than obligation. That evening, I sat in Frank's old chair by the window, now repositioned to catch the best light for my artwork. The street outside bustled with life, people walking dogs, children riding bikes, couples holding hands as they headed out for dinner. The world was full of people living their lives, pursuing their dreams, making choices that reflected their values and desires. I was finally one of them. As I write this story, sharing it with anyone who might recognize their own experience in mine, snow is beginning to fall outside my Chicago apartment. It's my second winter in this new life, my second year of being Eleanor Patterson rather than just somebody's mother, somebody's wife, somebody's bank account with feelings. Tomorrow is my 73rd birthday, and for the first time in decades, I'm excited about it. Mia is flying in from Colorado for a long weekend, her first break from veterinary school. Margaret and the book club are throwing me a party at the library. Michael and Emma plan to take me to dinner at a restaurant I've been wanting to try. None of it is elaborate or expensive or designed to impress anyone. It's just people who care about me celebrating another year of my life, and that feels like the greatest gift I could ask for. I think about that moment at Thanksgiving when Michael said I didn't fit in here anymore, and I realize he was absolutely right. I didn't fit in a dynamic where love was transactional, where respect was optional, where my needs were always secondary to everyone else's wants. I didn't fit in a family that saw me as a service provider rather than a whole person worthy of consideration and care. But I do fit in this new life I've built. I fit perfectly in my art classes and book discussions and travel adventures. I fit with people who appreciate my insights, who enjoy my company, who understand that being 72 doesn't mean being irrelevant. The journey from that devastating Thanksgiving to this moment of contentment hasn't been smooth or easy. There were days when I questioned every decision, moments when the old patterns felt safer than the new boundaries I was learning to maintain. There were nights when loneliness felt overwhelming and mornings when courage seemed impossible to summon. But every small step toward self-respect led to another. Every boundary I maintained made the next one easier to establish. Every person who welcomed me as I was rather than who they needed me to be showed me what genuine relationship could look like. Dr. Chen was right when she said I'd reclaimed myself. But it's more than that. I've discovered myself, maybe for the first time. The woman who loves art and travel and meaningful conversation. The woman who has opinions worth hearing and stories worth telling. The woman who can be generous without being depleted, loving without being diminished. If you're reading this and recognizing your own story and mine, if someone has told you that you don't fit, that you're too much or not enough, that your needs don't matter as much as theirs, I want you to know that it's not true. You fit perfectly in a life that respects your worth. You deserve relationships that nurture rather than drain you. You are valuable not for what you can provide, but for who you are. It's never too late to start over. It's never too late to set boundaries. It's never too late to choose yourself. The apartment is quiet now, filled with the gentle sounds of a life lived intentionally. My easel waits by the window for tomorrow's painting session. My suitcase for Ireland sits on the floor of my bedroom closet, reminding me that adventure is always possible. My phone shows messages from people who bring joy rather than stress to my life. This is what fitting in really looks like. Not conforming yourself to spaces that don't have room for your whole self, but creating and finding spaces where you belong exactly as you are. I toast to the woman I was, who survived so much and loved so deeply despite receiving so little in return. I toast to the woman I am, who learned that self-respect is not selfish and that boundaries are not barriers but bridges to healthier relationships. And I toast to the woman I'm still becoming, because growth doesn't stop at 72, or 82, or any age at all. The snow continues to fall outside my window, each flake unique and beautiful in its own right, just like each person who has ever felt invisible in their own life. We all deserve to be seen, to be valued, to be loved for who we are rather than what we can give. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here. Thank you for mattering in ways you might not even realize yet. Your voice matters. Your story matters. You matter. And if you found even a fragment of yourself in my words tonight, please know that you are not alone. There is hope on the other side of heartbreak, strength on the other side of silence, and a beautiful life waiting for you on the other side of the courage it takes to finally, truly, completely choose yourself.